Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Jest. A very warm welcome, literally warm, to this webinar about the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. It's the third in a series that we've been running over the past couple of weeks. My name is Josh Hillman. I am the Director of Education at the Nuffield Foundation. The Nuffield Foundation, for those who don't know, is a charitable foundation that funds research, development and innovation in education, welfare and justice. This webinar is particularly aimed at local authority advisors, speech and language therapists and others that reach a number of schools each, trusts and federations as well, early years leads and so on. That's who you are, it's great to have so many people here. We'd never be able to achieve that kind of national reach with an in-person webinar that we would normally run. So Zoom is definitely working to our advantage. I should say that I really wish I could see everybody, but unfortunately we're using the option for Zoom that doesn't have the postage stamps of all participants on the screen, just those who are the main speakers. So you'll just have to put up with that because otherwise it would be too tiny. I should say we have closed captions in English, which you can access by following the link to in the chat function. For some time, early years education has been a big theme for the Nuffield Foundation. In particular, we've highlighted the central role that early language plays and oral language plays in early childhood. It facilitates social and emotional development. It provides the building blocks for the development of later literacy skills. And it also enables a smooth transition to the primary classroom, building on children's capacity to benefit from all aspects of school life. But these foundations are not laid equally. There are gaps in language skills and vocabulary between children from lower and higher income families, on average, of course, that are already apparent at 18 months old. And by the time they start school, children from the poorest fifth of families are 19 months behind those from the richest fifth in terms of their vocabulary. Disparities like these have persistent effects throughout education and into employment. And enter COVID-19 and the abrupt and prolonged disruption to opportunities for preschool children to develop their language skills. We saw early years education providers that were closed or restricted in what they could offer. And since then, some families have been reluctant for their children to return to or take up places in nursery schools. The latest DFE data shows attendance in early year settings still lower than usual at 78%. Meanwhile, outside of institutional context, in the more domestic situation, young children's lives were for a long period largely home-based. They missed many of the informal ways in which language is developed, whether that's socializing with wider family and friends, absorbing ambient language in shops, in buses, in playgrounds, going to libraries or museums or having days out. Now, the research that Nuffield Foundation has funded during the pandemic has shown that young children in lower income families were hit the hardest. Fewer educational resources or developmental activities in the home, lower rates of engagement with parents who are often struggling with poverty or trying to juggle work and caring responsibilities. So whilst the development of all children entering reception classes in the current school year and the next school year have been impoverished, it's been particularly the case for those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Those disruptions and more limited exposure to language in both formal and informal settings have had a significant effect. And we know that teachers and of course all those who work with teachers such as yourselves are particularly worried about this. Recent research from the Education Endowment Fund shows that 96% of schools surveyed last autumn were concerned about the impact of the pandemic on language and communication skills in particular. So since then, we've had another lockdown, we've had continued restrictions on socializing, So this is not a problem that's just restricted to one cohort of school starters, the ones that started school this school year, but also next. Now, I've been talking about large-scale research, but if I could see all the tiny postage stamps on the screen, I'm sure I'd be seeing lots of nodding heads from those who are working with schools and in schools on the ground, which is where the Nuffield Early Language Intervention comes in. NELI was designed on the basis of scientific research by a team of developmental psychologists led by Professors Margaret Snowling and Charles Hume, who are both now at the University of Oxford. It was refined through a series of scale-up trials over the past decade, and the program's been shown to be highly effective. 3 months average progress for pupils on top of the time it takes to run the program, and potentially more, latest research is showing, for poorer children. And the EFs have given it their highest security padlock for the robustness of findings. The program focuses on vocabulary knowledge, narrative skills, and active listening. It's particularly targeted at those with relatively poor oral language skills, and it's easily delivered by teaching assistants. In recognition of the value of NELI, the DfE has made it a core part of their recovery program to support disadvantaged children who are falling behind even before they've started school. Reception pupils in, I think the latest count was 6,672 state-funded primary schools across England are benefiting from NELI this year. And in a minute, Sarah Tillotson, who's the program manager at the EF, who leads on early years, language and literacy, will talk about the rationale and the evidence behind the program and the experience of this current rollout. But importantly, for the purposes of today, the DfE has a few weeks ago announced additional funding to expand the rollout to all interested schools for the 2021-22 school year, starting next September. All resources and full training for teaching assistants will be provided for free, and schools can register online at www.teachnelly.org. We'll put that up for people to see between now and the end of July 2021, next month. The programme is delivered by a consortium of organisations which we're leading at the Nuffield Foundation, with the training and development led by Charles Hume and his colleagues at Oxford University, and Oxford University Press producing and delivering the resources. And Jane Harley, who's the Policy and Partnerships Director from OUP, will, after Sarah has spoken, briefly describe the opportunity this year and how to access it. I'm also delighted that we have Connie Racket from Nottinghamshire County Council joining us to give us the perspective of someone who's been very involved in delivering the programme this year across that county. And she's kindly agreed to join us and give us a sense of that after Jane has spoken. If you would like to ask a question to the speakers, you can save it till after they've spoken, or you can jot them down while they're fresh in your head. Please do that by typing your question into the Q&A box, not the chat. If your question is directed to a particular speaker, please could you highlight that in your question. We have, over the series of these webinars, been gathering an amazing set of interesting questions and challenges from people and points that need clarification, which we're using as sort of free labour and building up our FAQ site using them. So whether we're going to try and answer as many of them as we can, but even whether we can or we can't, we're going to put our thinking and our answers into that document. So really worth just anything that occurs to you or you want clarifying, please throw it in. And just to anticipate the first question, the slides will be available after the event. And I should, as you probably recognise already, say the webinar is being recorded, and we'll make that available too afterwards if you need it. We'll also post, there's one more planned webinar which is more aimed at schools. We've already got, I think we've got 650 sign-ups for that, but we can take more, I believe we can go up to 1,000. So please do let your schools that you work with know about those. We'll post that in the chat somewhere. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Sarah Tillotson.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. So I'm Sarah Tilts and I work for the Education Endowment Foundation, and today I'm going to talk about the rationale and evidence behind the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, and then give an overview of the programme itself on behalf of colleagues from the Oxford University. Josh has covered quite a lot of the points on my first slide here, so I'll just be brief. Language skills at 5 are amongst the best predictors of short and long-term educational outcomes. So as a society, we need to be working as much as possible to ensure as many children are on track for language by the end of the early years foundation stage. Success in literacy particularly relies on the development of language skills. On the right there, you can see Kate Kane's house model, which I think is a really good example of this. You can see the foundations for the house, the orange blocks at the bottom, are all skills that rely on language, and therefore highlight the fact that you need really solid foundation in language to have later success in reading comprehension. The reception year is a really key year for targeted intensive support for language. Lots of research has shown that if you assess children's language skills at 2 years old and you monitor them into their school years, at 5 years old, about 70% of those children who had shown language delay at 2 years old have gone on to resolve that language delay without any additional intervention. So the children that if you assess for language in reception, the children who are showing language delay at that stage are the ones who are more likely to go on to have persistent difficulties through school. So it becomes a really key year for that targeted support, so we can provide that early intervention and reduce the amount of difficulties children have for language. As Josh kind of highlighted, there's emerging evidence that there's been an impact of the pandemic and social distancing on pre-reception pupils, and concerns have been significantly raised about their language development and their PSED skills. So it's another time that we really should have a concerted effort to be doing as much as we can for our early years pupils. And the EEF has a resource called the Early Years Toolkit, which summarises all the best available international evidence on what works to improve children's outcomes. And you can see there that communication and language approaches come out as some of the top approaches or responses we should be having to ensure good children's outcomes. What's really typical of the education evidence space is that we have a really solid understanding of relationships between certain skills and outcomes, but we have less kind of choices and solutions where we've got confidence that those solutions can really change staff and children's behaviour, and that behaviour change can translate to good outcomes. And that's what's different or unique so far about the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. So all that research I kind of highlighted on the last page went into the development of the programme, and that happened kind of in the 2000s. And then the second decade, so between 2010 and 2020, the programme went through a series of randomised control trial evaluations to test explicitly if the programme can improve children's language outcomes. And last summer, the EEF published the latest replication of that evaluation, and in the largest number of settings so far. And it found that on average, the children who received the programme made 3 months of additional progress in language compared to children who didn't receive the programme in other schools. And at the EEF, we have a system of having a padlock rating for each of our evaluations, which rates the quality of the evaluation. And because this report received a 5 padlock rating, we have a really high level of confidence that it was the programme that was causing that impact. And we've kind of confidently isolated as many other variables as possible. So if people choose to replicate or choose to implement the programme, it's likely that those results will be replicated for their pupils. The study also highlighted that on average, the children who received the programme made 2 months of additional progress in early word reading, and it found that pupils who had English as an additional language made just as much progress from the programme as those who are native English speakers. And the EEF has recently published an evaluation of its evaluations and found that of all the programmes it's funded, the Nuffield Early Language Intervention is one of the best programmes for closing the disadvantage gap. So we think it's got universal appeal for this kind of targeted group who needs support for language. And because of all of this evidence, it's now the most well-evidenced oral language programme available in England. So we strongly endorse the programme and encourage schools to take up this funded offer. I'm going to give you an overview of the programme itself now. So what is it? It's a scripted programme with activities that primarily support children's listening skills, vocabulary development, narrative skills and early literacy skills, specifically letter sound knowledge and phonological awareness. And as I mentioned, it's a targeted programme. So it's meant for that subgroup of children who are showing a delay in language. It's not meant for children who have been found to have identified needs with language, so have a developmental language disorder. Those children need specialist programmes bespoke to their needs, developed by speech and language therapists, so they would fit into the specialist group. It may be that they also could access the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, but that's a broader discussion that needs to kind of happen with speech and language, the speech and language therapist who's working with that child. But the main thrust of the programme is to support those children who have a kind of mild delay to their language needs, to kind of give them that boost that they need in language, so they're kind of on track with the rest of the class. In terms of how it's delivered, it's aimed at about 4 to 6 children per reception class, and it's delivered as a 20-week programme, so it lasts for about 2/3 of the year, and is delivered each week in 3 small group sessions, each lasting 30 minutes, and 2 one-to-one sessions per child per week, each lasting 15 minutes. And you can see on the slide there, that's kind of an overview of what the group sessions entail, and the slight differences between the first 10 weeks and the second 10 weeks. And those differences just lie in the introduction aspect. So during that introduction, the adult greets the children using a song perhaps, and reviews the kind of listening rules, really typical approaches that are used in speech and language intervention programs. And the children play a listening game, and that listening game is modified in the latter 10 weeks and replaced with a letter sound activity or a phonological awareness activity. But that introduction is very short, it's only 3 minutes, and the main bulk of the session is focused on oral language. So the next 10 minutes is focused on vocabulary. There's 5 minutes to revise vocabulary previously taught, and then 5 minutes to introduce new vocabulary. And then 10 minutes is spent on narrative activities, where the adult predominantly orally tells a story using some pictures, and the children are encouraged to retell that story or tell their own story that relates to that particular theme, or summarise what they've heard. And then there's a quick plenary session at the end. If you would like to see videos of what those group sessions look like and those one-to-one sessions look like, these are available on the teachnelli.org website, and Molly's going to put that link in the chat so you've got access to that. In terms of how people are trained to deliver the programme to pupils, even before the pandemic, we were discussing developing an online training model for the programme, and that was because it would allow as many schools across the country to receive training for that programme and deliver it in their schools, so there wouldn't be any kind of geographical limitations because of the training being delivered face to face. So, but when the pandemic hit, we realised we needed a training programme that was accessible in a socially distanced manner, so there was another argument for this online model. So the EEF funded the Oxford team to develop this online training, and they've used the platform FutureLearn to kind of house that training. There are 3 linked online courses on this FutureLearn platform for Nelly. The first is called Language Fundamentals, which gives people an understanding of language development, why it's really important to focus on that and support pupils with it. The second course is called Delivering the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, and focuses on supporting people to deliver the group and one-to-one sessions. And these 2 courses we ask people to complete before they start delivering the programme to pupils, and they take about 8 to 10 hours to complete. Ordinarily, that material would have been covered in 2 face-to-face sessions, so there is quite a large commitment even though it's online. And the third course is a short course of about 2 hours and focuses on teaching people how to deliver the phonological awareness and letter sound knowledge aspects that appear in the latter 10 weeks of the programme. And that's when we ask people to make sure they've completed that training before they reach that 10-week midpoint. There is also, on this Future Learn site, there's a delivery support hub, which has loads of really good videos of showing Nelly in action, lots of support for assessment, and there's also a discussion forum on there where people can ask questions and receive support about how to deliver certain aspects of the programme or discuss children that they're kind of struggling to support. And all this material has no live elements. Staff work through it at their own pace, but because there's quite a large training commitment, we encourage schools to make sure they have or allow time out of class for teachers and TAs to complete that training as they would with face-to-face training. And the online course is monitored by a team of Nelly mentors, particularly that forum I mentioned. And the Nelly mentors have got a lot of experience in speech and language intervention, and particularly Nelly, so they're in a really good position to answer any queries and support schools. In terms of who should receive the programme, as I said, it's a reception. It's designed for a reception age group, so that for those classes, and it's targeted at the children with the lowest levels of language. Because it's a really intensive programme, we want to make sure the right children are receiving the intervention to get the most impact from that time. And to support schools with this, the Oxford University team developed a resource called Language Screen, which is a 10-minute tablet-based screening tool, and involves taking the child through 4 subtests: expressive language, listening comprehension, receptive language, and sentence repetition. And you can see the output of that language screen screener. So you're provided with the individual score across each of those subtests, an overall score, a percentile rank, and then a kind of digestible translation of what those score means, kind of in words, and then with a traffic light system. And we recommend that pupils who are flagged as amber or red receive the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. We think this language screening tool could be really useful at kind of a local authority level if you want to engage your schools to understand the proportion of children who were kind of flagged as having language needs, and that might support you in understanding how to ensure you've got the right resources to support children. In terms of who should receive the training for the programme, the staff who deliver the programme to pupils need to attend or take part in all 3 aspects of the training courses. And in the research trials, it was the teaching assistant or early years educator who was attached to the reception class who delivered the programme to pupils. And it might be that schools choose that way to organise who delivers the programme, but it might be that they have a HLTA or a teacher who is specialised in delivering interventions, and it might be that they're the best person to take part in the training and deliver the programme. We also require reception class teachers to take part in some of the training, so they have to do the language fundamentals course, which helps them really understand the value of a programme like Nelly. And we also require schools to nominate a Nelly lead. This is usually someone who's on the senior management team or senior leadership team, like an early years, the early years lead or the SENCO, and they are able to kind of monitor the delivery of the Nelly programme and ensure that staff have all the capacity and facilities to deliver the programme, and they can opt in to take part in the programme if they want to. Just before I kind of hand on to Jane to talk about how schools can sign up to receive the programme next academic year, I thought it was important to share how delivery has been going this year. So one of the things we had to consider when we were delivering this programme is that there's a 4-month lead-in time for the physical materials to get from when we ordered it to them getting into schools, which meant that we had to order packs before we started recruitment, or even before recruitment had been completed. So we took a hunch, and we guessed that about 25% of schools might be interested in receiving the programme, but the response from schools far exceeded our expectations, and we worked really hard to kind of modify what we were doing in our timelines to make sure as many schools could access the programme as possible. And in fact, the DFE, who led on recruitment, successfully signed up 40% of all schools with reception pupils, and the list of schools who have currently signed up to receive the programme is available on the .gov website, and Molly's going to put a link to that on the chat if you want to see which schools in your area are receiving the programme. But because we had this kind of difference in between how many people we could provide materials for before the Christmas holiday and after, it meant that there was some schools who were on kind of different delivery timelines. So some schools were able to kind of complete the language screen elements before Christmas, others completed in March when schools returned after that round of school closures in spring. Then, as I said, some people received the programme materials before Christmas or after Christmas, but everyone received the access to the online training in January and February, so they could work through the training materials, so they were ready to deliver the programme to pupils when the pupils returned after the spring closures in March. But unfortunately, because of those closures, the 20-week programme no longer fitted into one academic year. So we're encouraging schools to continue delivering the programme to their identified pupils who are currently in reception as they move into year one, so that the pupils can receive the whole 20-week programme. We understand that schools, the school staff who are currently delivering the programme to reception pupils may not be the right person to continue delivering the programme to pupils when they're in year one. So we're giving schools an opportunity to register further staff to take part in the training. And there's an email address on the slide there that schools can use to get in contact with the team to enrol new people in the training to continue delivering that programme. We will be shortly letting schools on that current rollout know what training and support is available to them, so they can continue delivering the programme to the next reception cohort. They don't have to explicitly sign up. We know that they've got the programme materials, and most schools will have someone trained to deliver the programme, but it might be that there's further support they want, or further access to the language screen, or want to train additional people. So we're going to let everyone know about that shortly. And also just to flag here that the Education Endowment Foundation funded an independent evaluation of the scale up and rollout of NELI, but unfortunately had to cancel the impact evaluation piece, the piece where we look at how much progress the pupils have made because of the spring COVID closures. But we continue to fund RAND, the organisation delivering the independent evaluation, to complete an implementation and process evaluation, and we're hoping that that will be published next academic year. So I'll hand over to Jane now, who is going to highlight how schools can get involved in the NELI programme next academic year.
Thanks, Sarah. So the DFE grant funded programme is open for all schools, universal school registration on a first come, first served basis. And all schools really need to do is access the teachnelly.org portal and register. To do that, schools just need a URN. They need their NELI lead, which Sarah referred to, and they also nominate their staff who will be involved, normally the class teacher and TA, and how many packs which they require, which again is normally one per class. They also need the head teacher support. Schools will be sent a memorandum of understanding outlining the terms and conditions of participation. And once they've gone through all of that, they are registered. OUP offers a support service for schools if they have any problems and can help handhold through the registration process. And there's lots of information, case studies and FAQs on the portal that will give schools additional support and a sense of what it looks like. To get a sense of the timeline, registration is open until the end of January. We've got over 1,700 schools now who have completed the entire registration process. So we're really urging schools to sign up early to avoid any disappointment, but there's still plenty of places available. In September, schools that are on the programme will be invited to enrol on the training and register for language screen. And you can complete the training and language screen assessments at any time in the autumn term. after enrolment. OUP will be sending out NELI packs in November, immediately after half term, so that schools again will have those for the training. And touch wood, next year, which is when the implementation is ideally starts between January and July, there's time to deliver the full 20-week programme with a further language screen review to assess progress in June, July. OUP has set up a number of advocate schools which are available. West Midlands, Ryder Hayes in Walsall spoke actually at our last teacher webinar. So if anyone wants to hear from them or see them, there's a recording on the teachnelly.org site, and the other schools are listed here. And just some recent news, Nelly won the Education Resource Awards for the SEN category for its support for children. But I'll, without further ado, hand over to Connie, who will talk about it from an LA context.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Connie Racket, and I'm an Education Improvement Advisor, and I lead on disadvantage across Nottinghamshire. Just to give you some context, in Nottinghamshire, we've got 285 primary schools, of which 259 are eligible to register for the NELI programme, i.e. not counting our junior schools. And like other local authorities, our education improvement team focuses on improving outcomes for all children and young people. But as we know, during the pandemic, it's had and it continues to have a disproportionate impact on those children living in poverty. So the team's work with schools has become even more focused, particularly supporting those schools in areas of high deprivation. My role within the team is to improve both the provision and the outcomes for those children and young people who are eligible for free school meals. And I advise, support and train school leaders in the best way to do this. And that involves ensuring that leaders are making evidence-based decisions. So when the catch-up funding and the free NELI programme was announced, I was delighted, and I wanted to encourage as many schools in Nottinghamshire to sign up. I was aware that NELI has got a proven track record of improving language and communication skills for young children at such a crucial time in their development. And the fact that the programme is aimed at those children who need it most, the most disadvantaged, meant that I was a member of the team who would oversee it. The huge word gap that exists nationally between disadvantaged children and their more affluent friends is reflected here too in Nottinghamshire. And children who live in poverty, leave our early year settings about 5 months behind in terms of attainment. So the next slide exemplifies how we worked in relation to NELI. Now, every local authority will engage with schools in different ways and for different reasons. In Nottinghamshire, the pandemic actually brought us all closer together, and we'd got much more regular contact with all our school leaders. We held regular telekits and briefings for senior leaders and provided key information in the form of weekly or twice weekly bulletins that went out to both school leaders and governors, and we continue to do that now. I'm given a spotlight on disadvantage slot at the telekits, and so I'm able to publicise NELI alongside other programmes and the additional funding that's available. I also deliver several training events and pupil premium consultancy during the autumn term, where I promoted and encouraged registration. Reminders to sign up before the December 2020 cut-off point were included in several of the bulletins. So in the second year, the announcement of the recovery premium this year in February alluded to the fact that NELI would be available for a second year. So I contacted the EEF and asked for the list of Nottinghamshire schools who had signed up. And I'm pleased to say that 124 of our eligible schools signed up, which is 48%. And I'm told this is higher than the national average, so it feels really positive. The list provided by the EEF also allowed me to see which schools had not yet taken up the offer. And there can be lots of different reasons why schools might not have signed up. Some might simply have missed the December deadline. Some might not have felt they had the capacity to engage at this time. And some might not have had the background knowledge of NELI. Some of the schools that weren't on the list were the targeted schools that we were already working with. So those schools with the requires improvement judgment in areas of high deprivation. and we knew that these were the very schools who would benefit from Nelly. So I was then able to send personalised emails to those head teachers and also alert other members of my team who met with senior leaders on a regular basis so they could also promote. I continue to update school leaders about the second year of Nelly through briefings, newsletters and training events. And I am hopeful that the percentage of schools in Nottinghamshire accessing Nelly increases. So the last slide I'm going to share is the support that we're currently offering. So as an education improvement team, we're currently supporting 16 targeted schools who signed up for Nelly in year 1. We want to give Nelly the best chance of success, so we've committed to 3 remote meetings at each school, an introductory one, a midpoint one at 10 weeks, and one at the end of the programme. We felt it was important to meet with a Nelly lead as they were overseeing the programme, and that's not necessarily the same person who's delivering it. 3 members of the education improvement team have been carrying out this work. So prior to the first meeting, they gathered some background information so they've got some context and understanding of the school. The communication and language area of learning and the last Ofsted report gave a really useful overview, and I've got some examples here to read to you. School was judged to be RI and early years good. Most children join the school with levels of development that are markedly lower than typical for their age. Communication and language area of learning is lower than national and Nottinghamshire average. The first meeting then allowed for key information to be gathered. Which member of staff had received the training? Had it been disseminated across the early years team so that capacity was being built? Had they completed the language screening? And if not, why not? And what needed to happen so that it could be done? How many disadvantaged pupils were in the group of children identified? And what was the pupil profile of the group? And again, I've got some examples here. The group had children learning through English as additional language. Some had children who'd missed some schooling, some children who were shy and anxious, children identified who were working below age-related expectations. Some children were identified from the language screening who wouldn't have been otherwise. So there was an example here of a chatty child, but the screening had showed had poor understanding. We also wanted to give the staff a chance to discuss the challenges, and so advice and suggestions could be offered. So for example, the delay to starting in January due to the lockdown meant the programme needed to run into year 1. So have the person who would be delivering in year 1 access the training so they were ready to deliver straight away in September. What happens if the person delivering is absent? What are the contingency plans? Are the children missing the same session when they receive the intervention? Could it be at different times? What happens if a child needs to isolate? And is remote learning possible? How have you engaged the children and are parents on board? We also wanted schools to develop ongoing monitoring for impact rather than just at the end of the unit Nelly impact measure, because we knew that there'd be offshoots such as improvements in phonics and engagement levels, improved behaviour and concentration levels. And so we discussed how to recognise and capture these. Lastly, next steps were discussed. We asked schools what were their plans for sustaining the intervention. Did they have plans for using it with other reception age children or in other year groups? In Nottinghamshire, we certainly feel that these supported conversations have helped schools in a much wider context than just with Nelly. They've been able to reflect on their implementation of approaches and how they can measure the impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connie. That's just an exemplary presentation of the central role that local authorities can play in helping us deliver this programme. And, you know, please questioners do feel free to stick in questions that we can direct to Connie about the practicalities of that central role, because, as I say, this, from our point of view, this is exactly what we want to see. We now move into the Q&A section of this webinar, and I'm also very pleased to say that we're joined by Victoria Parks, who's the team leader in the Department for Education's Early Years Quality and Outcomes Division, who's been central both years actually for the delivery and development of the programme. She's joining us, so I may chuck a couple of questions her way. I'll take one of the questions actually myself. In fact, it's come the same thing's come from a couple of people. Julia Bleat and Claire Johnson have asked, why are you targeting reception year? Why, surely in the spirit of early intervention, you should be going earlier. It's a perfectly legitimate question. I should mention that we are funding the development and evaluation of an early years version of this programme. Currently, it's working in parallel, but it's on a slower track. So, in time, we will have an equivalent version of that. There are other programmes available in the early years, but I just want to ask Victoria really briefly to talk a little bit about what else the DFE is doing in the early years space, which complements this programme.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I think it's important to emphasise it isn't standalone money. So when we announced the second year of NELI, we also announced a further 10 million for pre-reception early language support. That is going through its sort of internal sign-off process. So we aren't sure yet, or it's not publicised what the external offer will be, but there is a further 10 million for early years language support for next academic year. And in addition to that, there's 153 million announced on the 2nd of June for further early years training, so professional development training, particularly focusing on key skills, early language, emotional development support and physical development that will be rolling out in the coming years.
Thanks very much. And sort of on that theme, Sarah, can you respond to sort of the sub question, which is part of that from Claire, which is, what can we expect to see in terms of ensuring children get back on track at earlier ages? Is there anything that NELI can do to support that in terms of identifying gaps at the statutory 2-year check and so on? That's a question that's come from Claire.
I think a really good response to that is to consider using the ELIM. So the Public Health England have just funded the development of a stronger language tool to use with 2-year-olds, and that's having its national rollout this year. So, and I think it's mostly health visitors who are kind of spearheading the delivery of that tool, and that sits alongside the ASQ. So will be a more robust measure of children's language. The risk of kind of having a really intensive intervention at 2 years old is that you provide intervention to children who who would have gone on to resolve their language needs without any additional intervention. So we think that there's a lot of merit in supporting children's language development across the early years foundation stage, but really intensive targeted support that should come at reception when we really know that there's a strong need, and those children would are more likely to have those persistent difficulties. We need broader broader approach to supporting language for those younger children. So kind of whole class approaches, better interaction from adults, home learning environment responses. It's just that this type of intervention is really good for that kind of reception age group. And perhaps using tools like the ELIM to understand which children are kind of in your cohort and monitoring those would be kind of the first good step. And then as Victoria highlighted, there's kind of other approaches kind of coming down the track for that kind of pre-reception age group.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And your point about different age groups picks up a great question from Julie Ryder, who's asking about whether there's any evidence of sustained effects on outcomes over time. And obviously we're focused on the more immediate, the research has tackled the more immediate effect on outcomes in terms of language and literacy development and so on. But do those effects wash out as children progress through primary school? And that's obviously, it's too early to say, but because we have research that's tied to the National Pupil Database, we will in time be able to look at that. What I do know is that these sorts of effective interventions do have a sustained effect in general. So we would expect to see that, but we don't have any hard evidence yet is the direct answer that question. We've had some good questions about effectively about the sort of real cost of the programme in terms of teaching assistant times. So Catherine Cattrall has asked about does the cost per pupil take into account the time that the teaching assistants are spending with the group over the course of the intervention? And we also have another question, which is the extent to which the time. Yeah, well, I mean, it's effectively the same. So can I ask Sarah to respond on that point?
Yeah. So to deliver the group and one-to-one sessions, if a member of staff is delivering to 4 to 5 pupils, it takes 4 hours of their time per week for that kind of 20 for each week for 20 weeks. There's a small amount of time that's needed to kind of prepare the materials and prepare for the sessions as well. And I can't remember off the top of my head if the amount of staff time was included in the cost estimate that was attached to the effectiveness trial. But I'll look back at that and make sure there's a response to that in the FAQ response we send out later. I recognise that is a really large proportion of the cost, is the staff time for delivering the programme, but we have good confidence it's worth that time. We've seen the impact on children's outcomes in the evaluation, and because the DfE has funded the delivery of funded the cost of the programme materials and the training, it frees up kind of pupil premium funding to be made available to kind of cover the costs of staff time, perhaps. You asked me another question there, I think.
No, there was two pretty similar. I want to come on to a very different question, which is a great one from Claire Johnson, who's asking, as part of the training, are practitioners given support and advice on how to support children beyond the actual time in the intervention, particularly thinking about their play, so that where the children are taken away from the classroom, are they continually being supported throughout the regular day-to-day life in being reception year pupil and through their general time in school?
So as I mentioned, one of the aspects of the course is supplying people with understanding the importance of language development, and it does offer some kind of support around good approaches for supporting language development, but the weight of the training programme is dedicated towards delivering the programme to that kind of targeted group and working through those kind of scripted resources. So there is a lot less support for kind of bringing those approaches into the classroom explicitly as part of the programme. On the last webinar we had, which was school facing, a school who's been delivering Nelly for kind of 3 or 4 years has started to think about how they can kind of ensure this kind of positive spillover effects of delivering Nelly, and they offered some kind of support there. So if you watch back that video, kind of maybe around the 30-minute mark, they'll be explaining how the approaches they've taken to support children in the classroom, both those children who are kind of targeted by Nelly and the kind of broader group as well. I think it's interesting to kind of share some findings that we've done. We've done some secondary analysis on the effectiveness trial to look at the kind of spillover effects, because there is a big assumption that by taking that teaching assistant out of the classroom to work with that small group, it would be detrimental to the children who are in the class. And also people might argue that because teachers and TAs are provided this Nelly training, there'd be potentially positive spillover effects because there'd be greater support for language in the classroom. But the study that we've done has highlighted that there is no negative spillover effects, which is good news. So taking that TA out of the classroom is not detrimental to everyone else, but there's also no positive spillover effects. So currently the training programme doesn't really support the children who are not receiving the programme. So there's kind of more work to be done to see if there's anything that could be done to have that positive spillover effect. But I think the really important thing to emphasise is dedicating that staff member to the Nelly intervention is not going to be detrimental to anyone else, and is only going to be particularly beneficial to that targeted group.
Thank you. Connie, have you got any reflections on from the actual implementation of the programme from your authority along these issues?
Yeah, just that they have seen some other sort of spin-offs, but it's about it was with the targeted children. We haven't had the conversation yet about the effect it's had on other the wider class. But what I would say is that clearly those members of staff who are being trained in this language programme, their own professional development is improving. And so when they're then working and supporting, you know, across the foundation unit, across the reception class, you know, their skills and their knowledge and understanding of the importance of language development, you know, that will affect their teaching and that will affect their interaction with all the children. So I would say that would be, you know, professionally, that's why we go on training, isn't it? So that we learn about the theory and then we put it into practice.
Yeah. Emma Kerridge has asked about what about schools that have previously used other programs that they feel have been effective over time in terms of improving children's outcomes? Should they move away from those programs and replace them with Nelly? It's a good question. I mean, Nelly, as you know, Sarah outlined in detail, is the only program that's got a really strong evidence base behind it in terms of rigorous randomized control trial research showing these sorts of effects. So, you know, the kind of obvious answer to the question is yes, this is the one to go for. But I wonder if, Sarah, have you got any experience of schools that have gone ahead and moved from other programs to Nelly during the course of the last year?
I don't really have any explicit examples where schools have shared that they've moved away from an existing program and replaced it with this and are kind of happier or anything. But I just kind of want to reaffirm what Josh said, that if you've got a language intervention in place, that's really good, because we think that's the thing that's going to improve children outcomes the most. So having a response for language is good, but currently the best thing available to do for reception pupils is the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, because we've got that confidence it has a result, it can really generally improve children's outcomes, and it's probably because of its intensive nature. There's other things on the market that support language or support people with supporting children with their language. So any kind of whole class approaches, we really strongly encourage people to continue with those. This is a targeted intervention that should sit alongside that. And if people are doing any other targeted language approaches, this might be the time to kind of try out Nelly and compare it to that. And some of those language interventions could also sit alongside Nelly, because, as I said, Nelly is a really targeted intervention, an intensive intervention. It's for the children with the greatest need for language. The other interventions might be less intensive and kind of could sit and support the children who are almost on track for language and kind of just nudge them on track without involving them in this kind of broader, more intensive intervention. So it's kind of up to schools to choose, but we would strongly endorse trialling Nelly while you've got access to kind of free materials and training.
Now, on the subject of targeting pupils, there's a question from Viv Pratt about, you know, we talked about aiming at the children with the weakest scores, and she's rightly pointed out that a lot of those might include pupils with special educational needs who may or may not be receiving specialist intervention, depending on what's going on in their local authority or more generally. How does this work for those children, Sarah? So
I think that's a really good point, and it is highly likely that the children who are identified by a language screen, a lot of them could have either identified special educational needs or may have special educational needs, but not have that kind of EHCP plan or kind of SEND support plan yet. And that was noticed in the effectiveness trial. Lots of teachers and TAs recognised that there was children with special needs in that group, and that group was included in the impact evaluation. So the fact that we found 3 months progress suggests that it was good for those children to be involved in the Nelly intervention. But we want to stress that we don't want, if children have got a bespoke programme set for them by their SALT specialist and are kind of being removed from the class to access that, accessing Nelly as well might be kind of too much, and they might be missing a lot of their kind of whole class support. And so the school kind of needs to think about the individual and maybe discuss what might be the best approach for that child with special needs. If the child has not if the language screener flags some children who you have kind of anticipated might have special educational needs, but haven't kind of got that bespoke programme yet, Nelly's a good response, I'd say. kind of in the short term, and then it could be kind of reevaluated when you've kind of got those bespoke programs. But again, the screener kind of could provide you with strong evidence that they might need an educational healthcare plan or need to be identified as having developmental language disorder. So it's kind of another resource to kind of use for schools to kind of support in the decision making about how best to support those pupils. But I think it's up to the individual school, because it's quite individual children need to be considered quite strongly about whether they should be included or not, and it's quite hard to kind of have a general response.
And a slightly easier one on the targeting for you, Sarah, from Linda Kelly, which is, is the programme suitable for children with English as an additional language? How does it work for them?
Yes, so the effectiveness trial found that children who had English as an additional language made as much progress as children who were native English speakers who had a delay for language. So if they are flagged by language screeners as kind of as amber or red and in need of kind of additional support for language, Nelly will be a really good response for them.
There's a lovely question from Melanie Widnall, who's asking whether there's any evidence or analysis to indicate that children's confidence and their well-being and self-esteem are improved as a result of the intervention. I mean, we know that there's a strong link between early language skills and those factors, but is there any specific evidence from Nelly on those points?
So I don't think there was any explicit surveys collected on kind of children's on its impact on their kind of social emotional development, but there's lots of kind of anecdotal evidence from people's kind of comments in surveys that was kind of something that happened, and I've in conversations with schools who are currently delivering the programme, that's the response you've kind of got from people in the short term, that those small group and one-to-one sessions are building children's confidence, and they've seen that they're talking more in the classroom now. And so that's some of the kind of first effects anecdotally people were seeing, that children's confidence for talking was growing because of the programme.
That's great. I'll bring in Connie to see if she's got any real life expertise on this.
Yeah, thank you. I think we need to remember the noticeables as much as the measurables here. So, you know, certainly across our schools, teachers are certainly noticing improvements in concentration levels, confidence levels to join in at whole class where a child wouldn't necessarily have come forward. I mean, we're sort of around the midpoint at the moment in Nottinghamshire. We're about halfway through. So I would say that certainly if schools are using funding, which lots of schools are using some of their catch-up funding, or if they have disadvantaged pupils in the group, they're using pupil premium funding. And certainly when they come to report on the impact of the approaches, if Nelly's the approach, that's certainly something that you know, with the work we do in Nottinghamshire, and the advice is certainly capturing that side, as well as the progress in language development and vocabulary size, etc. It would also be around those behaviours for learning. So certainly worth capturing, and it would be interesting to see, wouldn't it, on a wider scale, whether there was. I suspect there is. And I just wanted to come in as well on the question around EAL, because I lead on EAL as well, and it's you know, some of our children learning through English additional language in the lockdown were you know, obviously we're at home using home language, which is what we would encourage. So when they were then returning to school, we did have lots of staff who were quite concerned with use of English because they'd had such a break from practicing, and sort of so actually lots of our you know, I would say a good proportion of the groups in Nottinghamshire contain at least one child learning through English as additional language, and we are seeing really positive results. Thank you.
Positive results, that's a good phrase to end on at 1 o'clock, just in time. Thank you so much to everybody for both speaking and taking part and asking brilliant questions. There's been some specific questions which we're trying to deal with in the chat and on the FAQ, people asking for links to things and so on. We're dealing with all of those, I promise you. I was just going to ask Sarah, have we got that video, or is that, or should we just put that in a link? We've got a wonderful video if you want to see the programme being actually delivered on the ground in a school in Walsall called Riders Hay School. Possibly not ready to show now, but we'll put that linked up. So thank you so much again. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and hopefully see you one way or another on the Nelly train. Okay, bye.